Hello and thanks for watching. Today I'm going to share with you how to get started with rubber stamping. We're going to cover assembling your stamps and assembling your ink pads, and then of course the all-important opening and closing your ink pads. Then we're going to move on to basic stamping and how to use a paper trimmer. We're going to wrap up the video with measuring our layers and decorating an envelope. Let's get started. All right, let's talk about assembling your cling stamp sets. This is a demonstrator only stamp set, but it works exactly the same way. Just wanted to tell you that because you aren't going to find it in any catalog. So your stamps are going to come and they're all attached to this rectangular shape of red rubber, but they're perforated so they're easy to pull out. You're just going to pop it out. You're going to peel off the back, and that's going to expose the not very sticky side of your rubber stamp. Then what you want to do is expose the matching label, and you'll see the label you can see correctly here. This is just some sheeting that covers it so they don't stick to everything. And then on the back side, it's shiny and it's got a slit somewhere in that stamp, and you want to pull the two pieces off of the coordinating image. Sometimes they fight you just a little bit. Just try the other side. There we go. Once you get the corner, they come off really easy. And then what you want to do is you want to, well, grab your stamp. You want to match the shape and direction of the sticker that you're about to pull onto the back, front or back, whichever way you look at it, of your stamp, the other side of your stamp, so that you know what it looks like. And this cling sheet also makes it so that your stamp will stick really well to your acrylic block. So once you set it down there, and you only get one chance to set it down, so just make sure you've looked from all angles and you kind of line it up, and then you're going to pull it off, and there you go. So this is a little bit off. I'm not going to worry about it, but I don't like this rubber hanging over. So I'm just going to take some scissors and just trim that little piece off. We're going to do another one so you can see, and hopefully I'll do better at that one. So I'm just going to trim it away just a little bit, and there's my first stamp. And then I'm going to take another one just so you have a second chance to see everything. So I'm going to pull the stamp off the sheet. I'm going to pull the backing off to expose the clear spot that I want the sticker to go. Then I am going to double check the words and remove the release paper from the correct cling label. Try one end, then try the other. One of them's going to give, there we go. All right. And then I'm going to set my label down. I kind of orient it straight, and I'm going to turn my stamp over so I can see the rubber, because this is the side I want the label on. I'm going to look at the bottom of the stamp and try and really line this up. I get one chance to set it down and pull it off, and there we go. See, much better job that time. All right, now I'm going to speed up the video and finish doing this so then you can see how I store my stamps once I get done with this process. So we have assembled all of our stamps. You really don't need this sticker sheet anymore, so I just discard this. And then I set up my case to hold all my stamps. So what I do is I remove this because it hangs over just a little bit, and it prevents me from being able to do this. So I pop this in here, lining it over as far as I can here. And now I have a mold to hold all of my stamps. So they're going to go in, and there's a double benefit to this. So they're going to go in this way, and you don't have to smash them down really hard because they're going to be held in place. So that prevents the entire cling sticky sticker from getting to the back of this. If it ends up being a stamp set you don't use very often, sometimes it can be challenging to pull the stamp back out. And the other benefit is that when you flip it over, you can see your stamps, and it makes it a little easier to not have to read things backwards in order to find the stamp that you want. And then this is how I store my stamps. If there was dies in them, I would put a magnetic sheet in here, and I would keep that in here with these stamps. It wouldn't be a problem. That's the way I like to do it when there are dies that coordinate with a stamp set. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. All right, so that is how you assemble a cling stamp set from Stampin' Up, and this is, I find, the best way to store them. All right, let's look at assembling a photopolymer stamp set, and this happens to also be a bundle. So I'm going to show you the way that they are packaged from Stampin' Up. This is the coordinating set of dies that goes with this stamp set, and I just have a magnetic sheet. I will link below the source that I use to get these. I get them from Stampin' Storage, but this is a perfect size to fit right in your stamp case, and I just keep them all right here. Sometimes I need 2 sheets if there's a lot of dies, and I don't have a problem storing 2 magnet sheets inside the case with my stamps. So when your stamps come to you from Stampin' Up, they actually come attached to, I'm going to pull this up. They come attached to this heavy acetate sheet, and then they have a really thin acetate sheet over the top of them for protection. So this thin flimsy one I pull off and just set aside. I don't use that again. And then all my stamps are here, and you'll see on the inside of the case are all the images of the stamps. So I remove my stamps from the heavy acetate, I put them on the coordinating image, and then I just put this heavy acetate down on top of them. The reason that I do that is so that if there are any dies, I can store them inside without any part of the magnet sheet or the die themselves touching these stamps. And also I do that because there are times when I will store already die cut things, already stamped scraps. If they were stamped with, for example, these pansies, I'll throw the scraps in here, and that way it's easy to find them. So anything associated with this stamp set that I ever want to save or keep, I keep inside the case. It just makes it easier to find things later. So that's all you need to do with your photopolymer stamps, is just add your stamps to the case, keep your acetate sheets on top for protection, and of course you can add your dies to either the photopolymer case or to a cling set case if that is where the dies belong. Now let's talk about assembling your ink pad. When you get your Stampin' Up! Ink pads, you'll notice that there are 5 stickers on the back. The top one is English, and then you have the French, German, and Japanese version of the name of the ink pad. So I'm peeling off the English version using my Take Your Pick tool, and now I'm going to stand the ink pad on its back end and put the label at the bottom of the front end. This way, if I stack my ink pads in some kind of a container, I can always see what the name of the color is. There are 5 labels on the back. The very bottom one is a blank label that you can use to add the color of the ink pad to the inside of the ink pad as well. This makes it very easy to tell the difference between different shades of color when you're working with multiple pinks in this case, or purples or blues. You're just going to open the ink pad, and at the bottom of the ink portion itself, you'll notice a space where this sticker fits very nicely. You can lay it in there, and then again, just use your Take Your Pick tool to slot it down nicely. I use the big end to give it a first stick down, and then I use the pointer end just to make sure it's in there really well. And that's all there is to assembling your pad. So now you can just close it up, stack it away with the rest of your pads, and you're ready to go. Now we need to talk about Stampin' Up! Pads, how they work, how to open them, and how to close them. So Stampin' Up! Pads are uniquely designed to stay as juicy as possible for you to get the best stamped image. And the way that that is done is to store the ink upside down. So right now, the ink pad where you would stamp on is facing the bottom of the case. And that's letting gravity keep as much ink as possible on the top of the pad. But now we need to open this and flip it over so that it can be used. The easiest way to do that is to take your thumbs towards the top of the ink pad, push down until you hear a click on this end. Then you can flip it over and slide it in. It's as simple as that. Then this area right here, you can put your thumb in, put your fingers on the bottom, maybe give it a little push if you need to unlock it, and then pull it out and flip it over. That's all there is to it. If this is a challenge for you, then the other way that you can do this is to use the lip right here. Put one thumb on the base and one thumb on this little lip right here and pull them apart. And then once again, you can slide it together and use it, and then push on this end, pull over here, slide it out, and flip it over. The other thing that's great about the Stampin' Up! Pad design is that it makes it very easy for you to watercolor with it. All you do is, before you open it up, you take the flexible part of the bottom and push it towards the top. So you just squeeze it together. And then when you open it, you will see that you have created an ink spot here that you can use with a watercolor brush and go ahead and watercolor to your heart's desire. So once again, we're going to flip this over and click it closed. Now it's ready to store. With your label there, you'll know exactly which pad you have. Now that you know how to assemble and use the ink pads and how to assemble your stamps, it's time to put the two together and get a stamped image. I'm going to teach you some tips and tricks on how to do just that. So I've opened my ink pad and I have my stamp here. And the basics are 3 steps. Tap to ink up, set on the cardstock, hold, I mentally count to 6, and lift. That's all there is to it. The things that you want to remember are to tap lightly. If you smash the stamp down into the ink pad, you'll notice an excessive amount of ink around here. Clean that off and try again. You're pushing way too hard and you don't really need to do that. What you want is for the cardstock to do its job. The cardstock's job is to pull the ink off of the stamp and let it soak into the cardstock. So you just need to give it some time by setting it down, applying firm, level pressure, count to 6 in your head, and then pull straight up, and you'll have your beautiful image. That's all there is to it. For this portion of the video, we're going to talk about a paper trimmer. This is like a sewing machine if you're a quilter. You've got to have one. It's very difficult to create cards without a paper trimmer. This is Stampin' Up's paper trimmer, which comes with a scoring blade and a cutting blade, both of which are important when making cards. This piece of cardstock is cut to 5.5 by 8.5. So to show you first, this could be a card base. I'm going to demonstrate the scoring tool. So I'm going to score this at 4 1/4, which is halfway across the card. Keeping my cutting blade up high, bringing my scoring blade up, and just rubbing it along the cardstock 3 or 4 times, lifting this back up again. And now I have my score line that I can fold my card on. What if I wanted to cut this? I can move my scoring blade down to the end, and I can measure a shortcut, like 1 inch, using the left portion of the measuring table. Slide my cutting blade down, and it will slice it right off. I'm going to hang on to this. I'm going to show you a tip in a minute with that. If I wanted something wider than 1.5 inches, I can go this way across the measuring portion of the cutter, or excuse me, the paper trimmer, and I can slide up. I can always start from the top and slide down, or I can start from the bottom and slide up. So that is how you cut your paper with the paper trimmer. Now I'm going to show you some of the features of this paper trimmer. So I'm going to cut a line. Maybe I need a slit in this card. So I'm going to start my cut at 1 inch and go down to 4 inches. The way that I know how to do that is I look at this small line right here, and I'm going to set this down below the 1 and move this up to be in line with the 1 inch. Now I'm going to apply pressure, and you can hear that it's cutting, and I'm going to drag this down to the 4 inch, and that will give me a 3 inch slit in my card. Sometimes you need a slit to slide things through. Sometimes you want to use that method and cut a rectangular or square shape out of a layer. You can use this trimmer to do all of those things. You're also not limited to a 6 inch piece of cardstock. You can measure much farther than that. There is an arm that extends out and goes all the way to 17 inches. So that you can measure easily 12 by 12 cardstock or even something much longer if you need to. That arm tucks back in for just regular use with a card base that you're used to using. I don't use the arm very much when I'm just making basic A2 size cards. Let's talk about some basic dimensions to use when you're just starting out card making. Usually crafters will make cards that end up being, let me hold that, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. That's an A2 size card, and it's typically the size that most paper crafters make their cards. Now, there are some who make them 5 by 7. There are some that make them 3 1/2 by 8 1/2. There are every measurement you could imagine. If it's a folded piece of cardstock, it could be a card. You're going to go down to maybe a 3 by 3 or a 2 by 3, exposed portion if you're going to do a smaller gift card insert. There's all sorts of sizes, but typically speaking, the A2 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 folded note card is the size that most paper crafters prefer to use. Now, that fold can be done 2 different ways. You can start with an 11 by 4 1/4 and score it at 5 1/2, and you end up with what is referred to as a top folding note card or a hot dog shaped note card because it's tall and skinny. You can also start with an 8 1/2 by 5 1/2 piece of cardstock and score it at 4 1/4. Then you still end up with a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 note card, but it is generally referred to as a side folding note card. You certainly can orient it as a top folding note card. There's a twist. You could also orient this one, the top folder, as a side folding card. There are dozens of ways that you can express your creativity, even starting with just the base layer of your card. So now let's talk about layering. I'm going to bring in the top folding card, and we'll just work with that one. So your basic layer begins at 5 1/4 by 4. The general principle is that you take a 1/4 inch off each time to make your layers. So your next layer, I'm just going to tuck them in the corner so you can see the 1/4 inch coming off, and then we'll layer them together. Your next layer would be 5 by 3 3/4, and then maybe another layer at 4 by 3 1/4. So if I stack all of these together into the corner, you can see I have a 1/4 inch distance each time. Now what you might want to do, first let's center these. So centered, your card would look something like this. And if you wanted yet another layer of a mat, or maybe this is where you stamp your flowers or your trees or whatever is the larger focus of your card, there is 1/4 inch mat from card base all the way through to a 4th layer. What I could do is I could take these 2 away, and maybe I just want to, maybe this is designer series paper and I want to show off a little bit more of it. So I might use a smaller layer right away. So that's going to expose more of this color. Maybe it'll give a bigger pop. Maybe it's just some cardstock that I want to use. I could even shrink this more, but this is a 1/4 inch gap here and then a 1/2 inch gap here. So there's all sorts of ways that you could layer your card to show off your layers and accentuate whatever your focal point is. So these are the basic measurements that you want to be able to remember. The 8.5 by 5.5 card folded in half, the 11 by 4.25 card folded in half, and then these are 3 layers that are separated by 1/4 inch. You don't have to remember all of this. If you look in the description below the video, there is a link to a document that you can download, print off, and keep handy to use all of these measurements. The next thing as far as measurements go that you want to consider is how big to create a layer for a stamped greeting or image. I'm going to bring in my paper trimmer. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the video. And I'm going to show you what I do to measure for my stamped images. I'm going to bring in my Stamping Your Way to the Top stamp set, and I'm just going to grab this Welcome to the Team stamp. Now, one way to measure is to put it on an acrylic block that fits the stamp. And then you can grab a ruler. I like to just use some grid paper, and I can measure the acrylic block. So it is 2.25 inches by 2 inches tall. So I know that is big enough to stamp this. So I can cut my cardstock to 2 inches by 2.25. And that's going to be big enough to take my image, add some ink, and stamp it down. All right, so that is one way, and it fits just perfect. But there's a lot more space here than there is here. Maybe you'd like it a little more balanced. Let's talk about another way to figure out how much cardstock you need to stamp an image or a greeting. The way I like to do this, if I'm going to use just the stamp itself, is to measure, again, using my grid paper up against the left and the bottom, and I round up by 1/4. So this is just barely over 2 inches wide. I'm going to cut the cardstock 2.25 inches wide. This is just about 1.25 inches high. I'm going to go up to 1.5 inches. So 1.5 inches by 2.25. I'm going to go ahead and put this back on an acrylic block so I'm able to stamp with it. And then I'm going to bring my paper trimmer back in with a piece of scrap cardstock. And this time I'm going to measure this 1.5 by 2.25. And now we're going to stamp this in the same color. Bring in my ink pad. Got my stamp. Did I measure that right? It looks kind of long. No, that's right. Oh, that's upside down. That's okay. All right, and then I'm going to fit this on the paper again. It's a little tighter fit this time. But there we go. So there you go. These are the 2 greetings that we stamped. This one was measuring the acrylic block, and this one was measuring the stamp itself. Both are perfect. Both work great. It's a matter of style. How much white space do you want? Are you going to add some ribbon or some other embellishments? Maybe you want some extra white space. Is this just going to layer up on some other cardstock? Maybe you'd like it to be a little tighter. And remember, when you're making your layers, for the greeting, you can do it just like we did for the card layers. You can do 1/4 inch on the top side and on the side. So a 1/4 inch larger. That would make this layer, we started at 1.5 by 2.25. So the mat would be 2.5 by 1 3/4. It would make a nice mat around here, and you can do the exact same calculations using this one, and that gives you your mat for your greeting. The last piece of stamping that I want to show you today is stamping on an envelope. Stampin' Up! Sells these beautiful basic white envelopes, and there's a couple ways to give the recipient a little peek at what might be coming in the mail to them. One thing that you could do is you can stamp right on the front of the envelope. I recommend that you keep your stamping confined to the lower left so it doesn't interfere with the address and certainly not the postage. Another thing that you could do, another way that you can stamp on an envelope is to stamp on the flap in a repeating pattern, making sure that none of the ink is going to get down here or on the sides. The way you do that is to tuck your envelope under some scratch paper to make sure that the rest of the envelope is protected. In this case, I'm just going to stamp in a repeating pattern, and actually the stamp is a little bit large, so I'm going to pull this off and get it more in the middle. This is Stampin' Up! Grid paper, but you could definitely use computer paper or any kind of scratch paper that you have to do the same thing. You just want to have the flap hooked on. And I'm just going to start at an angle and work my way across. Just adding lots of dots. And you can see that the flap of this envelope is going to have lots and lots of dots. But when we close it up, it's not going to have many at all. I'll put a few more here, and there we go. The back of my flap is nicely decorated. Give somebody an idea that there might be some card with a lot of dots on it on the inside, but none of the important part of the envelope is decorated in any way. Now, that certainly doesn't stop you from giving them a preview and still stamping in that lower left corner with another stamp. In today's video, we covered assembling stamps, assembling ink pads, basic stamping, as well as measuring and cutting cardstock and decorating your envelope. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to my channel, welcome. Please subscribe. And by all means, click that notification bell so you know when I post my next video. Have a great day. Bye-bye.